Eyes in the attic. For starters, I'm a girl in my junior year of high school. A few days before the main part of my story takes place, my dad mentioned that he thought a squirrel had gotten into the attic. It wasn't the first time. We'd heard scratching noises up there before. He promised he'd get a trap over the weekend and take care of it. I made sure he was going to get one that wouldn't hurt the squirrel, and after some grumbling, he agreed. Over the next day or so, I heard lots of scratching noises too, but I didn't think much of it. Dad would get the trap, and then we'd release the squirrel at the park. No big deal. That Friday night, my parents went out to dinner with friends, leaving me alone at home. My best friend Jessica was at a road game with the girls' basketball team, so I planned to hang out by myself until she got back. After school, I had a snack, checked Reddit, and noticed the usual scratching coming from the attic. I didn't worry. Dad would handle it. I went up to my bedroom, and right away something felt wrong. My desk drawer was open, and papers were scattered across the surface. I'm not the neatest person, but I was pretty sure I didn't leave my room like that in the morning. I walked over, heart pounding a little, and glanced under my bed and in my closet, just in case. But nothing. No boogeymen. I laughed at myself for being paranoid and assumed I must have just left the drawer open in my rush to get to school that morning. While I was eating dinner, I noticed the scratching above was getting louder. I kept glancing up at the ceiling, wonder if maybe it was more than just one squirrel, or maybe something bigger, like a raccoon, had gotten in. Then there was a loud thud from above. I froze, looking up. This was a lot more than scratching. This was a heavy, deliberate sound. Slowly, I walked up the stairs, checking each room, hoping I'd find a picture that fell off a wall or something like that. But there was nothing that could explain the sound I heard. I walked down the hall, my gaze drawn to the pull-down hatch that led to the attic. As I walked closer, something wasn't right. It took me a moment to realize. The hatch was slightly open, just an inch or two, but enough for me to feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stood there, staring at it, my pulse racing. And then, out of nowhere, eyes. Human eyes. Cold, icy blue eyes. I screamed and bolted for the stairs, nearly tripping down them. My mind was screaming, get out now! I ran to the front door and flung it open. I found Jessica walking up the path to the house, confused at my sudden appearance. Call the police, I screamed at her, my voice shaking. There's someone in my attic. She was clearly startled, but did what I asked. The police arrived in what felt like forever, rushing inside with their guns drawn. Realizing I'd left my phone inside, I used Jessica's to call my dad. I couldn't stop shaking as I told him what was going on. He said he and my mom were heading straight home. 10 minutes later, the officers emerged, leading the strangest man I'd ever seen. His hair was matted, his clothes were filthy, and his skin looked pale and unkempt. His eyes, those cold, icy blue eyes, met mine as he was led to the squad car. I shuddered, my stomach churning. Apparently it wasn't a squirrel in the attic after all. The police found food wrappers, empty soda cans, and a certain mess in one of the corners up there. The man had been living in our attic for at least a few days. The only explanation the police had was that maybe we had left a door unlocked at some point. Or, if he managed to climb onto the roof, he could have gotten in through the attic window. There was no sign of a forced entry, so that was the best they could come up with. From that night on, I made sure every window in the house was locked, and I triple-checked the doors every time I came or went. But even now, weeks later, I'm plagued by the feeling that someone's watching me from the shadows, lurking just out of sight. I haven't felt safe in my own house ever since. A sick joke. I'm in my mid-20s, and I'm no stranger to a good night out with the guys. I was at a bar with a couple of buddies, having a few beers and catching up. The place was crowded, music was loud, and everything seemed normal. But then my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. Don't drink too much tonight, read the text. It was a strange message, but I figured it was just a wrong number, or maybe one of my friends messing with me. I ignored it and went back to my conversation. But my phone buzzed again just seconds later. "You look nice tonight." I frowned. Was this for real? A feeling of unease crept through me, but that was nothing compared to the next message. A picture of me at the bar, sitting at the table with my friends. It was taken from across the room. My stomach dropped. I looked around, feeling a growing sense of dread. But there was no one staring, no one acting suspicious. My friends were all talking, oblivious to what was happening. I told myself it was nothing, just some prankster, and I put my phone away, trying to shake it off. Still, the unease lingered. My night was ruined. I decided to head home early. I had drunk a little too much, and by the time I got back to my apartment, I was really feeling it. I crashed into bed with my clothes still on, too tired and buzzed to bother changing. My phone vibrated again as I fell into a heavy sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, still feeling a little tipsy, my head pounding. My phone was glowing with new texts. "You should have listened," the first one said. "You shouldn't have had so much to drink. But I'm glad you made it home safe nonetheless." My stomach twisted, and then I saw the last text, a photo of me, passed out on my bed. Suddenly, I was wide awake. I sat up, heart racing, listening closely. The room was silent, too silent. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scanned the dark, trying to hear anything that would tell me I wasn't alone. Nothing. I slowly got up and crept out of my bedroom, my stomach churning. As I stepped into the hallway, I froze. The front door was open. I felt a rush of shame. I was so drunk earlier, I probably forgot to lock it. Or worse, I left it wide open myself. But who the hell came into my apartment? Had they followed me from the bar? A buzz from my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. "Do you feel okay?" I froze, staring at the screen. I didn't respond. "You should try to get some more sleep." My hands were shaking as I finally typed back. "Who is this?" The 3 little dots popped up on the screen. Then, "Someone who cares." A chill ran up my spine. "Where are you?" I typed, my fingers trembling as I hit send. The reply came instantly. "Close." I snapped. "This isn't funny." The next message took longer to come through. I stood there, near the door, a cold sweat dripping down my back. Finally, another message appeared. "Then maybe you shouldn't have treated me like a joke." I read the message again, my mind racing, the words beginning to sink in. My head was still pounding. I was still drunk, but this wasn't making sense. My throat was dry. My stomach continued to churn. I stumbled back to my bedroom, feeling disoriented. My head swirled. What the hell was going on? Before I could even think, I heard a woman's voice from the darkness. "Am I a joke now, Sam?" I turned toward the voice, struggling to make out shapes in the dark. Then something sharp pressed against my ribs. It dug in hard, sending a shock of pain through me. Then again, and again. It took a moment for the pain to truly register, about as long as it took me to realize I'd been stabbed. I groaned and staggered back. My vision swam as I tried to make sense of it all. My eyes finally adjusted to the dimness. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. It was Sarah, my ex-girlfriend. We dated for about 6 months. She was sweet, at first, but she was too much, talking about marriage and kids after just the first few weeks. I couldn't handle it, so I ended things a month ago. I never thought it would come to this. "Well?" she asked, staring down at me with cold eyes. "Am I a joke?" The world started to spin. The blood loss, the alcohol, the exhaustion. It was all too much. I tried to move, but I stumbled to my knees. "I would have made you so happy," Sarah said, her voice calm, almost eerily sweet. She leaned down and kissed my forehead. "So happy, Sam." "Sarah," I gasped, trying to hold on to consciousness. I'm hurt bad." She stood up straight, looking down at me with something cold in her eyes. "That makes 2 of us," she said. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving me there, bleeding out on the floor. With what little strength I had left, I crawled to my phone, which had fallen off the nightstand. It took me forever to unlock it, my vision blurry. Finally, I dialed 911. I don't know if I said anything. If I did, it couldn't have been coherent. Everything went black. I woke up in the hospital nearly 24 hours later. The doctors said I was touch and go for a while, but I was lucky. They were surprised when I told them I could identify my attacker, and even more surprised when I told them who it was. 2 days later, Sarah was arrested. She's claiming mental illness as her defense and playing the victim. I guess I'm supposed to feel sorry for her. Obviously, I don't. I can't stop thinking about how close I came to dying that night. If I hadn't been able to reach my phone, I would have bled out right there on my bedroom floor. I also can't stop thinking about the life we almost had. What if I had just gone along with her? What if we had gotten married and had kids before I saw how unstable she really was? Would we have ended up on the news when she killed us all? Sure, she was a little pushy and a lot clingy, but I never would have thought she was capable of this. That pretty 5'2" woman I shared my bed with could have easily killed me, and it seems like that was her plan. The prank avenged. When I was in middle school, I'll admit, my friends and I were kind of dicks. We did what a lot of kids do. Pranks. Nothing too serious, but enough to annoy people. We'd ring doorbells and run away, throw toilet paper over houses, make prank phone calls, that kind of stuff. But there was this one guy on our block, Mr. McCabe, who, let's just say he didn't take kindly to that sort of thing. Mr. McCabe was a retired high school teacher. The guy had a reputation of being a real hard-ass, always yelling at anyone who stepped foot on his property, giving you that stay off my lawn kind of vibe. Me and my friends didn't know him all that well since we were still in middle school when he retired, so we never had him as a teacher. But we knew enough to stay out of his way, at least until Halloween. Halloween was our big night for pranks, so naturally, Mr. McCabe's house was at the top of our list. Pranking him would make us legends, at least in our own minds. We spent hours planning, and finally, the big night came. We crept over to his house after dark, laughing and whispering as we worked. The yard was covered in toilet paper, the decorations in tatters, and his jack-o'-lantern was nothing but a squashed mess. We thought it was the best prank ever. But then, we made a mistake. We made a little too much noise. The lights in Mr. McCabe's house flicked on, and we dove for cover behind some bushes across the street. It was like something out of a movie. Mr. McCabe stormed outside, his face turning bright red, yelling curses and throwing his hands in the air. It was then that my friend Tom, head asshole of our group, reached into his bag and pulled out an egg. He lobbed it across the street, and it landed with a splat on Mr. McCabe's roof. The guy went absolutely ballistic. He had no idea where it had come from, but he was fuming, running around his front yard looking for us. We were doubled over trying to suppress our laughter, but Tom wasn't done. He grabbed another egg, but this time he threw it directly at McCabe. It hit him square in the chest. And that's when things went from funny to terrifying. McCabe saw where the second egg came from. He saw us, my friends and me, huddled behind the bushes. He locked eyes with me, his face full of rage. He charged across the street, yelling at the top of his lungs. We bolted. I've never run so fast in my life. He chased after us for a while, but we managed to outrun him. I was terrified he got a good look at us and would tell our parents. For the next few days, I was on edge and jumped every time the phone rang. But nothing happened. No calls, no confrontation. I figured he didn't get a good enough look to identify us, and after a while, I let it go. Big mistake. A few months later, my parents went out one evening for some awards banquet at my dad's work. I stayed home, planning just to relax, watch TV, and play some Xbox. Everything was fine, until the phone rang. I answered, but no one spoke, just heavy breathing on the other end. I hung up, thinking it was a prank phone call, and went back to my game. But a few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked out the peephole, but nobody was there. With a shrug, I went back to the couch, but just as I sat down, there was a knock on the back door. I walked through the kitchen and looked out the back window. Again, no one was there. After that, there were taps on the windows in the living room. I started to panic. My heart was racing. This was before cell phones, so I couldn't call my parents. I didn't know what to do. The knocking, the banging, it kept coming from all around the house. It was like someone was circling, stalking, tormenting me. My hands were shaking and my knees felt weak. I ended up hiding in the hallway closet, curled up in the dark, praying whoever was outside would leave. But it didn't stop. The ringing, the knocking, the banging, the windows rattling. It went on for what felt like forever. 30 minutes, maybe more. I could barely breathe. My mind was racing. Who was it? What did they want? Would they get in? And what would they do if they did? Finally, though, it all stopped. After what felt like an eternity of silence, I slowly crept out of the closet, trying to calm myself. My mind was still racing, though, and I jumped when the phone rang again. I picked it up cautiously. It started with the same heavy breathing. Then a voice, gruff and angry, came through. Never mess with my house again. And if you tell anyone about this, you'll regret it. I know where you live. The line went dead. It hit me like a freight train. That voice, that rage. It was Mr. McCabe. He'd seen us that night, or at least he'd seen me. I wasn't sure how, but I was certain it was him. He'd bided his time and waited for me to be alone and vulnerable. My parents came home about an hour later. My dad opened the front door and looked at me, irritated. "What the heck is this?" he called out. An egg. It was splattered all over the door. I was scared stiff, but I didn't say a word. I kept my mouth shut. As a matter of fact, I never told anyone. Not my friends, not my parents, nobody. I didn't want to risk it. I was too scared. Scared of Mr. McCabe and scared of what my parents would think if they knew what I'd done to him on Halloween. So I've stayed quiet all these years. Just last week, a former classmate sent me a message that our high school was holding a memorial for Mr. McCabe. He'd just passed away at 92 years old. So I guess it's finally safe for me to tell the story. The unknown roommate. I moved into my first apartment after college, the kind of place that seemed perfect for someone just starting out. Small but cozy, with a pool for summer afternoons. The complex was quiet and clean, and most importantly, it felt safe. I was starting a new job, and living on my own for the first time was both exciting and a little bit scary. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. I came home after work, had some dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. It was everything I imagined independence would be. Until one night, something shifted. I remember it so clearly. It had been a long day, and I was exhausted. I kicked off my shoes at the door and made my way to the kitchen, my mind still on work. But then I froze. The sliding door to the pantry was open. I had definitely closed it. I always do. I'm a bit obsessive about it, honestly. But there it was, just wide open. My heart started pounding. Something felt very wrong. I stood there staring at the open pantry door for what felt like an eternity. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of place, but nothing else seemed off. Still, the feeling lingered, like I wasn't alone. I checked the whole apartment, my nerves growing with each passing second, but there was no one there. I convinced myself that I must have been too tired, that I had just forgotten to close it, but the uneasy feeling stuck with me. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Over the next week or two, little things began to happen. At first, I shrugged them off, but the pattern kept repeating. The remote control would be on the couch, not the coffee table where I was sure I left it. The lamp I turned off before leaving for work would be on when I got home. My case of soda, one I had just bought last week, seemed to be depleting faster than I remembered drinking it. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was just imagining things. But no, something was off. The feeling of being watched was growing, and I couldn't shake it. One Wednesday morning, I had to take my car in for service. The dealership gave me a ride back to the apartment, and I decided to work from home for the day. I sat up at the desk in my bedroom, trying to get through the mountain of work I had waiting for me. Then I heard it. A soft scrape. A click. I froze. It was the sound of the front door unlocking. Someone had just come into my apartment. Panic surged through me. I was alone, and I had no idea who had just invaded my home. I sat there, paralyzed, as I listened. Then I heard voices. At first, I thought maybe more than one person had entered, but as I focused, I realized it was just the TV in the living room. The TV? I barely had time to process the confusion before I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. In a whisper, I told the operator that someone had just entered my apartment. When I explained that it wasn't exactly a break-in, but that the intruder had simply let themselves in using a key, the operator asked if I had a roommate or a partner that I had given a spare key to. I told her no, I hadn't given a key to anyone. "The police are on their way," she said, trying to reassure me. I curled up in the corner of my bedroom, trying to control my breathing. I could feel tears starting to streak down my face. Every sound, every movement had me on edge. It took about 10 minutes for the police to arrive. I could hear them knocking on the front door and then shouting for the intruder to open up. "They're coming in," I whispered to the operator. From my bedroom, I could hear voices muffled by distance. Then I heard something that made me as angry as I was scared. "This is my place," a man's voice said. My heart skipped. I slowly stood up and peeked out into the hallway. One of the officers saw me and came over immediately. I told him it was my apartment and nobody else lived here. As a matter of fact, I had never even seen that man before. The man then tried to change his story, claiming that he was the owner of the apartment complex and was checking up on a complaint. I didn't buy it for a second. I had met the owners when I signed my lease. That's when things took a turn. His lies had caught up with him, and his excuses fell apart. The man wasn't the owner. He was the owner's son. He'd been living with his parents for the past few months after dropping out of school, but they had given him a single condition. He had to get a job. Apparently, he'd been lying to them for more than a month, saying he was going to work every morning. Instead, he'd be spending his days hanging around the local diners and coffee shops, trying to mooch off the places that didn't know better. But when they got tired of him hanging around without ever buying anything, he found another way to avoid working. He'd been taking spare keys from the office, keys meant for emergencies or repairs, and letting himself into apartments. And mine? Well, apparently it was his favorite. He liked my couch, my snacks, the drinks in my fridge. All those little things I thought were just me being paranoid, they were him, letting himself in and making himself at home in my apartment while I was at work. That day, with my car gone for service, he assumed I was in the office and wouldn't be back for hours. I could feel the nausea rising in my throat, the violation, the dread. He'd been in my apartment dozens of times. The owners were horrified and furious. They kicked him out immediately, but by then, the damage was done. I couldn't stay there. I could never feel safe in that place again. They didn't fight me when I asked to break my lease. I couldn't imagine staying there a single night longer. Now I'm renting a small house with a friend I made at work. It's going to take me a long time before I feel okay living alone again. Although, I guess I had a roommate all along. I just didn't know it. Thanks for listening, friends. If you enjoyed these frightening and allegedly true Home Alone horror stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you next time with more whispers from the pines.